I'm Professor Robbie McDonald, Chief Scientist at the Office for Environmental Protection, the OEP. Welcome to this, our briefing on the OEP's assessment of government's progress in improving the natural environment over the period 1st of April 2024 to the end of March 2025. I'm going to introduce this year's report and give a little background before handing over to Professor Cathy Maguire, our Head of Assessments, who will talk you through our approach and key findings. So let's start with that background and why we are doing what we are doing. In 2021, Parliament passed the Environment Act, which established a new system of environmental governance for England. First, legally binding targets that set ambitions and timelines for significant environmental improvement in vital areas, including air quality, water, biodiversity, and resources and waste. Second, a set of environmental principles that must be considered by all ministers to ensure environmental improvement and sustainable development. Third is the Environmental Improvement Plan, or EIP, which is a long-term plan that must set out how government intends to improve the natural environment. Finally, the fourth provision of the Act is us, the OEP. We were established to make sure that this new system works as it should, that the environment is improved as Parliament intends and in line with the law. One thing that we must do at the OEP is to report on whether the Environmental Improvement Plan, the EIP, is working and make our assessment of progress towards meeting those legal targets. Our report today is our fourth statutory report and covers progress with the EIP up to the end of March 2025. Since then, of course, Government has revised the EIP. This EIP 25 was published on the 1st of December 2025, and that was not in time for us to consider it in our assessment this year. So the Environment Act targets, the previous set of interim targets, and EIP 23 together provide the overall structure and content against which we assess progress during the reporting period. Wherever we can, our assessment of prospects and opportunities for improvement also reflect developments since March 2025. One of the main shortcomings of EIP 23 was that it lacked attention as to how to achieve its ambitions. On our initial view, we can see that much of the formal advice we provided for the review of the EIP has been taken on board. Government describes the new EIP 25 as a roadmap for improving the natural environment and as a prioritised, systems-based plan that is clear on what, how and who will deliver environmental ambitions. But even as governments change and EIPs are revised, environmental targets remain as a legal obligation and are a constant towards which progress must be made in order to comply with the law. Let's move now to our overall findings. While we have found that more progress has been made in this reporting period compared to the last, that progress is still not enough to overcome or even to keep up with the environmental challenges this country now faces. We have previously called for government to speed up and to scale up its efforts and to do more to show how its plans stack up to achieve its legal obligations. This message remains at the core of our assessment this year, now more pressing than ever, as the need for effective action continues to grow. Government's response to our last progress report stated that the UK government's number one mission is to kickstart economic growth. Government recognises that the natural resources underpinning our economy are finite and under increasing pressure, and that the natural environment is amongst our most valuable national assets. As government then states in its new EIP 25, nature is not a blocker of economic growth. Instead, it enables, drives and protects economic growth. Nature's recovery is an essential foundation to ensure prosperity, health and well-being. Recent analyses led by the Cabinet Office of the chronic risks facing this country are sobering. They state that accelerating climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution will have cascading, compounding impacts that will amplify threats to national and international security. Decelerating and adapting to climate change, halting and reversing biodiversity loss, and avoiding and mitigating pollution are all the objects of the Environmental Improvement Plan and consequently are the focus of our assessments. We have found this year that once again government remains largely off track to meet its legal obligations to improve the environment. These prospects are not fixed. Important targets for halting biodiversity loss and protecting at least 30% of land and sea are nearly upon us, but the window of opportunity to meet these 2030 targets is closing fast. 2030 is only the first stop on the way to reversing biodiversity loss by 2042. Government actions will now determine whether key targets in 2030 are met or are missed. What happens now matters. I will now hand over to Professor Cathy Maguire to run through our assessment and findings in more detail.
Our progress report is an assessment of government's progress against the targets and commitments they've set themselves. It's an integrated assessment of England's environment. This means we analyse issues within and across the different areas of the environment and over past, present and future timescales. In carrying out the assessment, we consider the actions that the government describes in its annual progress report, as well as a range of wider evidence. When we do our assessment, we look back with a specific focus on the reporting year. In this case, it's April 2024 to March 25, and we look ahead at the prospects of meeting ambitions, targets and commitments so that we can make recommendations on how government could improve progress. Our assessment is not just one report. We also publish a methodological statement and our statement of compliance with the Code of Practice for Statistics. Together, these set out what we did, how we did it, and what we find in a transparent and accessible way. Our assessment is quite comprehensive, so we use summary assessments to present our analysis in a concise way. We assign ratings to past trends, whether they mainly improving, mixed, or mainly deteriorating, to progress within the reporting year, whether this has been good, mixed, or limited, and to whether the prospects of meeting targets and commitments are largely or partially on track or largely off track. These ratings are based on a combination of available evidence and expert judgment. This enables us to present an overall picture of past trends, progress and prospects, structured by the 10 goal areas of the EIP. So let's look at the overall picture. Is England's natural environment improving? Viewed against the aim of significantly improving the natural environment, our summary assessment is that while more progress has been made this year compared to last, very substantial challenges remain, and government remains largely off track to meet its Environment Act targets and EIP ambitions, targets and commitments. Now let's look at this in more detail, starting with environmental trends. We used a range of indicators to look at key trends across the EIP areas. These are a broad set of indicators. They don't capture all the aspects of each goal area, so they can only provide a partial picture, but it's one that's informative and looks across a wide range of topics. There are also data gaps and issues with the timeliness of data, which we highlight throughout the report. Our assessment of 59 recent trends shows that 24 are improving, 11 are static, 16 are deteriorating, and 8 were not assessed due to data availability. These proportions are broadly similar to last year, with improving and deteriorating trends observed across most EIP goal areas. In relation to the natural environment, while there are signs that the downward trajectory in England's species abundance has levelled out, the abundance of wild and farmland birds continues to decline. The overall state of the water environment remains concerning, with declining biodiversity and continued habitat degradation in the marine environment. Pressures on biodiversity persist. Deteriorating trends continue to be observed for direct drivers of biodiversity loss, such as climate change and invasive non-native species. While the area of land under agri-environment schemes continues to increase, along with the area of land cover likely to support large-scale nature-friendly habitats, the continuing decline in the condition of protected sites prevents the creation of a coherent and resilient ecological network. When it comes to reducing overall levels of pollution, improving trends continue regarding reductions in specific air pollutants, specific chemicals and greenhouse gases. However, the number of pollution incidences in water has increased. Overall trends and patterns of production and consumption are not encouraging. In the short term, resource productivity has decreased, while the raw material footprint is increasing, and there continues to be little change in England's carbon footprint. Residual waste generation has remained stable, and household recycling rates have decreased. However, water consumption is decreasing. Regarding sustainable use of natural resources, the percentage of fish and shellfish stocks harvested sustainably continues to improve, but the percentage of woodland that is sustainably managed continues to decrease. In relation to human health and wellbeing, improving trends continue to dominate for air quality, but exceedances of nitrogen dioxide, ozone and nickel standards persist, and the condition of bathing waters is deteriorating. There are deteriorating trends in reducing risks from environmental hazards. The estimated number of properties at risk of surface water flooding has increased, along with the decrease in the condition of flood or coastal risk management assets, and wildfire incidences continue to increase. In terms of engagement with the natural environment, while the frequency of adults' visits to the natural environment and levels of pro-environmental behaviour remain relatively stable, deteriorating trends continue to be observed for children. This assessment of individual trends forms part of our overall assessment at EIP goal level, where we conclude that in 2 goal areas, clean air and for climate mitigation, improving trends dominate. In 5 goal areas and for climate adaptation, trends show a mixed picture. And in 3 goal areas, enhancing biosecurity, reduced risk of harm from environmental hazards, and enhancing beauty, heritage and engagement, deteriorating trends dominate. Compared to our last progress report, the goals of reducing risk from harm from environmental hazards and enhancing beauty, heritage and engagement with the natural environment have changed from showing mixed trends to deteriorating trends dominating. Now let's look at progress within the reporting year. In assessing progress, we looked at whether policies and actions are comprehensive. That is, do they cover the most important issues? Are they credible? Is their development and delivery high quality? And are they coherent? Do they work well together to achieve the intended impacts? We assessed progress towards meeting 43 individual targets and commitments, including Environment Act targets as well as overall progress by EIP goal area. Our assessment of individual targets shows that good progress has been made towards 12, mixed progress towards 19, and limited progress towards 12. And if we look specifically at the 13 Environment Act targets, good progress has been made towards 4, mixed progress towards 7, and limited progress towards 2. In relation to the natural environment, progress towards achieving a growing and resilient network of land, inland waters and sea that is richer in plants and wildlife is mixed. While progress was good on woodland creation and wildlife-rich habitat restoration or creation, it continues to be more limited across those wider actions and policies essential to nature recovery. This includes environmental land management schemes and in the freshwater and marine environments. Good progress has continued with tackling specific sources of water pollution, specific chemical pollutants and greenhouse gases. But there's been limited progress in relation to patterns of production and consumption, including in improving resource productivity, eliminating avoidable waste, and more sustainable use of natural resources. However, there is good progress in relation to reducing potable water demand. In relation to human health and well-being, there's mixed progress regarding some air pollutants and limited progress in reducing the risk from exposure to high temperatures, although good progress continues to be made on improving protection from flooding and coastal erosion and enhancement of landscapes. Compared with last year, there's improvement in relation to clean air, managing exposure to chemicals and pesticides, and climate change mitigation, where progress has improved from limited to mixed. Now let's turn to future prospects. We also assess the prospects of meeting those 43 individual targets and commitments, as well as overall prospects by EIP goal area. Regarding the individual targets and commitments, our assessment is that government is largely on track towards meeting 5, partially on track towards meeting 16, and largely off track towards meeting 21, while the prospects of meeting 1 couldn't be assessed due to a lack of sufficient evidence. Again, if we look specifically at the 13 Environment Act targets, here government is largely on track towards meeting 3, partially on track for 5, and largely off track for 4. Those areas where the prospects of meeting targets and commitments are largely on track are the same as last year. They relate to specific air pollutants such as PM2.5, specific sources of water pollution such as phosphorus loadings from wastewater, chemical pollution such as land-based emissions of mercury, and specific greenhouse gases such as hydrofluorocarbons. In relation to the natural environment, while the prospects of achieving the 2030 species abundance target and nature-friendly farming commitments are partially on track, the prospects relating to those wider actions and policies essential to nature's recovery remain largely off track. This is still mostly due to continued delays and a lack of urgency in the implementation of important actions in freshwater and marine environments. Sustainable soil management continues to be a significant gap. The prospects of meeting targets and commitments relating to patterns of production and consumption are also largely off track. And in relation to human health and well-being, while the prospects of meeting the Environment Act targets for PM 2.5 are largely on track, this is not the case for other air pollutants. The prospects of significantly reducing levels of harmful chemicals entering the environment are largely off track, and the prospects of reducing the risk from environmental hazards are only partially on track. The lack of progress regarding climate adaptation persists. Action is not keeping pace with increasing risk levels, and this hinders the prospects of meeting targets and commitments across many other areas. So at EIP goal level, we concluded in 3 goal areas the government is partially on track, and in 7 government is largely off track. Compared with last year, our assessment ratings have not changed. So how can progress be improved? Across the assessment, we identify factors impeding progress and prospects. These include delays in key policies, strategies and regulatory frameworks, that actions don't address all major pressures, resources are not being given as needed even when the tools and actions are well understood, and there's a lack of urgency with which positive actions are implemented. These continue to apply as much this year as before. Across the assessment, we identify many opportunities for improvement and make recommendations focused on addressing barriers and harnessing these opportunities. Last year, we made 8 key recommendations and 36 specific ones covering the EIP goal areas and the cross-cutting themes of nature-friendly farming, green finance and green choices. Of those 44 recommendations, we can identify good progress in only 5 over the last year. We saw mixed progress in relation to 14 and limited progress on 18. We were unable to assess progress towards 7, largely because this depends on the EIP 25 or other policy developments and pending decisions. Our assessment of progress and prospects continues to be hampered by the level of detailed information made available by government and gaps in monitoring systems. In particular, the degree of disclosure and transparency of delivering planning information to date has not been fully consistent with that needed for public scrutiny or government accountability. So to conclude, the environment matters. Nature recovery is at serious risk, and only by restoring the natural environment will governments secure this valuable national asset that underpins quality of life and prosperity for current and future generations. Looking ahead, environmental and climate challenges are growing, but the window of opportunity to address them is narrowing, and the effort and cost of doing so is increasing. These challenges are interconnected, and so they require policy responses that are comprehensive, integrated, and can respond to emerging issues. The EIP 25 is this government's opportunity to maximise the prospects of meeting its targets and commitments. I'm now going to hand back to Robbie, who will set out what we think are the key actions to achieve this.
Let's move on then to our conclusions and recommendations. The government has a series of legally binding and other commitments for 2030. That's now only 5 years away. So EIP 25 is now the critical plan for improving England's environment by 2030. Our key recommendations last year focused on priority areas for action. Those recommendations were designed to ensure successful delivery of the EIP. We make the same recommendations again this year, reflecting on the insufficient progress and the lack of urgency seen in this reporting period. Our standing recommendations remain that government needs to 1. Get nature-friendly farming right, 2. Maximise the contribution of protected sites for nature, 3. Speed up action in the marine environment, 4. Set out clear mechanisms for reconciling competing demands for land and sea, and 5. Develop a circular economy framework. They also include 3 cross-cutting areas, namely 6 to mobilise investment at the scale needed, 7 to regulate more effectively, and 8 to harness the support needed to achieve ambitions. As so much depends on the EIP 25 and other important policy developments, we will continue to assess progress towards our standing recommendations in our next progress report. In conclusion, our report comes at a period of significant and ongoing legislative, policy and operational developments. Looking ahead now to 2030, our message to government is consistent. Government needs to speed up and scale up its efforts, and actions must be shown to stack up to make achieving targets and commitments a reality. Progress has been too slow, so plans need to catch up and then keep up with the environmental challenges we now face. EIP 25 must inspire that action and drive change across government. In turn, government must catalyse action across society. It needs to provide the leadership and concerted effort required to achieve the significant environmental improvements to which it is committed and that are now so urgently needed. It remains to me to thank all those who've helped with our evidence and analysis and who have helped review our report, and to colleagues at the Climate Change Committee, DEFRA, the Environment Agency, Environmental Standards Scotland and Natural England. Thank you.